morning. I'm not used to seeing people not through a screen, so I brought this thing out here. No, just kidding. I'm just not as good as Laura, so I need my security blanket here. Give me 1 second while I get comfortable. So I'm going to have like a little bit of a preamble, so thank you for your patience. I think we're in an amazing industry of innovation that just keeps surprising us. Way back in the day, we said, who would ever play a shooter on a console? Thank you, GoldenEye. And then we said, who would play a shooter on a phone? Thumbs, not going to happen. Fortnite obviously proved us wrong. One thing I've learned over the years is that I should never say that will never happen, or this is the future of games. And so I stopped saying that. And I encourage everybody to also adopt that as well. There's a lot of disdain for NFTs in games. In fact, when folks heard that I was moderating a talk on NFTs, some people were surprised and some people were kind of upset that I was covering the topic and giving airtime to it. Now, to be clear, Bonfire is not making an NFT game, so I have no skin in the game. I'm also on the board of the Academy, so I have the privilege and honor of being on it, and I take it super seriously and have a strong sense of responsibility around DICE and what we do here. It's just that this atmosphere really reminded me of the time when I came into the industry about 2 decades ago with a lot less money in the air. But I spoke at DICE probably about 15 years ago about free-to-play microtransactions. There were a lot of skeptics at that time and detractors. Some questioned why anyone in their right mind would buy digital items in games. Some said these games are just low quality and would not be adopted by mainstream players. Many against free-to-play actually feared a dystopian future where many game developers would be forced to make games that just rip people off. Over a decade later, some bad things definitely happened. Mistakes were made. But great games and companies have emerged that use microtransactions. Further, the industry did not have one fate. The death of PC gaming did not happen. Consoles are obviously kicking serious ass. And the industry has only grown more diverse, and the best games are being honored here tomorrow night. For those of you that are worried about the pollution of games by blockchain, fear not. It's the players who ultimately choose what games they play and the passions of developers that drive what they make. So that's my long-winded way of saying let's be open-minded and learn what good may come of NFTs and games, if any, someday. So the goal for today's panel is, one, discuss the fundamentals of why NFTs will exist in games, discuss the challenges and opportunities in the development of NFTs in games, and then discuss the player adoption of NFTs and how communities, as a result, may change over time. Some anti-goals, introducing basic crypto NFT topics, all that stuff is online, you can find it. Spending too much time on a topic over opinions or over prognosticating, and then egregious self-promotion, that's what we have the opening party for, and we can all do that over there. So let's deliver value for our audience by providing really interesting and thoughtful, thought-provoking discourse. So for the audience, how many people, I don't know if I can see through the lights, are actually working on NFTs or on the blockchain? Raise your hands. Okay, so some people. How many of you in the audience are skeptical or afraid of NFTs coming into games? Can't really see, but I think that's your opportunity for the panel. So we'll do some short introductions, starting from John.
Hi, my name is John Linden, CEO of Mythical Games. I've been in the industry for about a decade. Started off as a studio head at Activision Blizzard, mostly on the Call of Duty franchise and then a little bit on the Skylanders franchise. Moved to mobile gaming, had a studio with some people out here I saw, called Seismic Games, working on projects like Marvel Strike Force and some other projects there, and that became part of Niantic. And then started Mythical in 2018, thinking about exactly these situations and what it means and how we can kind of bring these new, kind of design concepts into virtual worlds.
Hi, my name is Beryl Li. I'm a co-founder at Guild Games. We are a decentralized autonomous organization as a guild, and we actually purchase a number of these NFT games, NFTs, and we lend them out to our communities in the Philippines, LATAM, Venezuela, like Indonesia, India. So that's what we do.
And hey everyone, my name is Jonathan Lai. It's great to be here. I'm a general partner at Andreessen Horowitz. So we're a Silicon Valley venture capital firm that invests in both games and crypto. And I spend most of my time focused on games investments and also some of our Web3 gaming deals as well. And before Andreessen Horowitz, I spent about a decade in the industry as an operator as well. So I started off as a producer at Riot Games, and then moved from there over to Tencent, where I led some of their North America biz dev investments and publishing. So really excited to be here today.
Awesome. So there's a lot of disdain and skepticism around NFTs and games. What would you say are the most common misconceptions? And the follow-up question is, what criticisms or worries do you actually think are true?
You started off light.
Yeah, just get it out of the way.
Yeah, I'm happy to start off. And so I think one of the questions that we actually get a lot as investors is just, hey, do you think Web3 games are going to take over the world? Like, are they going to consume sort of PC and console games and mobile games? And I actually think that's a very interesting misconception, usually from folks that aren't in the games industry. Because if you are in the games industry, you'll realize that every new platform has actually led the market expansion, right? And so when we started with consoles, when PCs came out, that didn't destroy the consoles, right? When mobile phones came out and mobile games evolved, that didn't destroy PCs or consoles. And so I think in a similar vein, like one of the things that excites us about sort of NFTs and in general sort of crypto games is that Web3 games are bringing in sort of new classes of players that have never traditionally played games before. And I think a lot of the work that YGG, that Beryl does over here can speak into that. But I think of NFTs as market expansion and not necessarily a zero-sum game where someone has to lose in order for an NFT game to be successful. I think that's an important misconception.
So the misconception that I hear a lot, like these days, would be, there's a lot of like carbon emissions, for example, in like printing assets on the blockchain, and it would actually be deteriorating to the planet. I think that is, not like true, because there's actually less carbon emissions, for example, in like Bitcoin, for example, compared to if you actually look into like minting coins, printing like like money, being able to like move them around. If you actually look at, for example, with art pieces, like there's a lot of toxics in paint, for example, that like minting this in the blockchain is like so much like less. So that is like one of the misconceptions. And blockchains right now, they're moving from proof of work to like proof of stake. So you have like blockchains like Immutable, Polygon, Solana, looking at the proof of stake kind of, which will actually save on energy. And yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think we're very early on, especially the environmental concerns. I think it's a great point that's been brought up, but it is very early days, and I think there's a balance, right? So I think if you look at networks like Bitcoin and Ethereum, they started off as proof of work, which is these cryptographic puzzles to increase security and make sure it's a secure transaction. And that's true. That's kind of, you swing the pendulum one direction, it is very secure, right? But at the cost of energy. And I think what we're seeing now, we're now kind of in the second generation of how to think about this. And it hasn't been that long. It's only been a few years, to where there's been major technological advances already of what's the right balance, right? So you can go, you can kind of swing back into these proof of stake networks. And I think that is a big misconception I think we're hearing a lot of. But it's very early days. This feels like mobile games year one, year two. And I don't know if you remember the mobile games that came out in year one and year two, but they weren't fantastic necessarily. They weren't the Supercells and the Rovios that you think about with mobile gaming. I think that's the phase we're in. So there are definitely a lot of innovations that need to happen, and it's happening at a very rapid pace right now to really find that balance between what's enough to keep these transactions secure and what's the right energy consumption that we're willing to put into these transactions.
Yeah. If I'd actually double click on a point that John made, which I thought was a really good one. If you think about where crypto is today and where NFTs and the state of Web3 is, I sort of think about it as sort of 2009 in the mobile game days, right? And every computing platform, when it starts off, like people discover new ways of building games, developers come in. There's a tremendous amount of talent that's coming into Web3. I think that's one of the things that we're seeing that excites us. And sort of the promise is that right now we're looking at sort of NFTs and games, and it's just a snapshot in time. So imagine if you had gone back to 2009 and you had looked at mobile games, you would have seen maybe Angry Birds was actually the most successful mobile game back in 2009. And if you had extrapolated from there to say, hey, like all mobile games going forward are going to be swipe-based, physics mechanics, premium single-player games, you would have been horribly wrong, right? Like you would not have been able to predict Candy Crush and Clash of Clans and all these other great games that have subsequently come out. And so I think just double-clicking on John's point, it's think of NFTs and Web3 as an evolution, and we're still early in our journey, and there's going to be a lot of change in the sector going forward.
John, just to follow up, like what kind of money is coming into the space? It seems like there's tons of funding going into kind of Web3 and blockchain gaming.
Yeah, so I would say that there are three main sort of types of funding that are coming into sort of NFTs and crypto games. So first, we see a lot of funding from endemic games investors, so folks like us that have traditionally invested in non-crypto games as well. And then, strategics, the Tencents and Zyngas and of the world that have put out sort of heavy blockchain investment efforts. The second class is there are a lot of crypto-specific funds. And so, these are crypto investors that have started up early on investing in cryptocurrencies and DeFi protocols, and now they're excited about NFTs and games, and we have a lot of money from those funds going into the space. And the third, which actually doesn't get discussed very often, but I'm actually most excited about, is a lot of these games that have NFT components are getting funded directly by players. Like the players themselves are actually the investors. And I think that's one of the new things that NFTs and Web3 games enable. And just to double click on what I mean by that, a very common sort of go-to-market motion for a Web3 game studio right now is, they have a game pitch, they start making the game, they actually take some of the assets of the game, and it could be characters like, Blankos and Blanko's Block Party, it could be swords or hats, virtual goods, and then they actually do an NFT pre-sale. And so these items actually are sold to the community in advance of the game actually launching. And what this is it's essentially Kickstarter 2.0, right? Like if you put a game up in Kickstarter, people sign up and they donate because they want the game to be made. A similar thing is happening in these NFT pre-sales, except it's turbocharged because these people that now own the NFTs that will go in your game, they feel like owners in the game, right? Like they own a tiny slice of your game, and they will be your biggest evangelists and early adopters, essentially. And so I think that's actually a very exciting way of raising money for an NFT-based game that does not involve any institutional investors. Like you don't need to talk to any VCs, you don't need to talk to any strategics. It's just you raising money directly from your players and then building the game with them.
So of these three, is there a sense as to where most of the money is coming from? Is it evenly distributed, or is most of the money actually coming from the players? Is it coming from the funds? Is it coming from these crypto-backed places? Where's most of the money coming from?
Yeah, I would say that the majority of the funding, specifically in NFT games to date, has primarily come from, I would say, the crypto-specific investors to date. But I think the exciting thing is that as more games teams are coming into the space and building great games with NFT components, we're seeing more endemic investors fund the games world. And I think as more people enter the space that are players become a much larger source of funding as well.
So that's one question I have, is that if a lot of the money is coming from the crypto side, my sense is they actually don't fully understand how difficult it is to make a great game, which is what it's going to be built on the backs of. And my sense, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the types of games that are going to benefit from this are the ones that basically are the ones that last for 10 years, right? Those are really exceptionally hard to make. Things that actually can build and grow long-lasting communities. Would you say that that's probably true?
I'd love to tackle that. I think yes. I mean, that is definitely what we've seen right now. And there's a lot of that, well, where are the real games? Why are the real games not using this yet? Well, games take a long time to make, right? It's not easy to build new worlds and new IP and the lore behind it and the depths of systems that need to go into a true blockbuster game. And I think what we're seeing right now in the NFT space, and I think it's a fair criticism, is that games are fairly shallow. It's a lot about making money. It's a lot about putting a token out there and hope you can monetize it. And I think it's a short-sighted view of where this goes, right? And I think that's the important part to think about, is that to really make this work right, you have to think about what does this do to the player, right? What does a tangible asset mean to them? How do I use that in my game economy, right? And to do that right, you have to think through this. This is not something you can just bolt on. We kind of say if your game sucks without blockchain, it's going to suck with blockchain, right? It's not going to fix a game. You really have to use this as a way to engage a community. But I think once you think through these ideas and you think through what does ownership mean in my game? How do I bring stakeholders into my game and into my economy? What does that mean for guild structures and things like that? that's when the power of what's about to happen is starting to happen, right? And the concept of bringing it in, I mean, we kind of view there's been a couple big transitions in gaming over the last 20 years, right? One was free to play. It was kind of the democratization of game access, and our industry saw us go from 100 million gamers to 3 billion gamers with that shift. I think the second one that kind of happened was the democratization of game content, right? So you have groups like Roblox and Minecraft, and what happened to our industry at that point? We had more content than any one studio could ever produce. And suddenly we had more stakeholders involved, and we had all of these groups, brands got involved, esports groups got involved, influencers get involved, and suddenly we had these new industries that popped up to do that. And I think the NFT, what that whole world does for us is it suddenly creates a democratization of the game economies, right? We're now able to bring these groups involved and bring them into our game. We can let them be entrepreneurial. We can lower our cost, our CAC for games. We can increase LTV. We can find new marketing channels of how we can get these games out. And I think we kind of skip through that a lot of times, and it's like, well, it's bad for the environment, and it's just a moneymaker. It's a scam, right? And if you look at it, a lot of the situations, that's probably a fair estimate. There is some bad stuff out there, just like any free-to-play. But if you think through deeper where this goes, it gets very powerful when you're thinking about it in terms of how do I design this into my game economy, into my virtual world.
But a lot of the early money, that's probably going to get burned, right? Because essentially they're backing things without teams. And I find that to be really interesting if people come to me and say like, hey, I've got all this money. Can you find me a team to make this? And I feel like it should go the other way.
Yeah.
So a lot of this money is backing stuff. The thing that I worry about with the Kickstarter stuff is that you're setting expectations, making promises to players with the hopes that you're going to be able to make something, but that might not actually happen, even for teams with the best of intentions. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say that's still a risk with Kickstarter as well, right? Like, a large number of Kickstarter projects don't launch. But I would say in general, it's just a lot of the froth that's happening right now. It's just a mark of sort of the general maturity of the space fight. That over time, like we expect to see stronger and stronger teams enter the Web3 game space, and we're particularly excited about what we're seeing these days is like veteran game developers, the folks that are in this room that have shipped some of the best games in the world. Like they're increasingly becoming crypto curious, right? And so they're thinking about ways to integrate NFTs into their game. And like I have absolute confidence that, that some of these teams are going to release games that are fun to play, that are positive for players, and are using NFTs in ways that are like, non-predatory, right? And so I think it's, as the space matures, like we're seeing better and better teams come in.
I wanted to add something to that as well, to that point. So the NFT play-to-earn games is very, very new. This is really, really new. I think like 90% of players playing play-to-earn NFT games is actually in Axie Infinity, and mostly like in emerging markets as well, right? Like the Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, Venezuela, and that really took off during like the pandemic, right? Like when like a lot of people have actually lost jobs, and they had, because of lockdowns, they're just like at home, but they have a smartphone and an internet connectivity, and so they actually end up playing games, and guess what? They can actually earn rewards, which is much more than their minimum wage, right? And so there's a number of people, and there's like a niche kind of community that find, for example, Axie Infinity, this play-to-earn game, is really, really interesting for them. And what we actually see within, at least within the guild, right, there is actually a lot of demand for this kind of like play-to-earn NFT games, and there was actually just one game, right, which is just Axie Infinity. So, but right now, there's a number of games right now that are building play-to-earn NFTs that are looking into launching in like the second quarter of like 2022. But at this point, there still needs diversification in games that could actually meet the interest of the particular gamer, right? Like different genres. And that's what's missing right now in the NFT play-to-earn space.
So I think that's interesting, the different genres. So let's just say that, hey, we're early days, and the types of games that we have today are just kind of the more primitive versions of what we're going to have in the future. If we think about games that already exist today that have great communities, like what are some games that you think NFTs could have been built on the backs of?
That's a great question. So you're saying existing games in the market that could have enhanced,
had NFT potential.
I mean, I think it's
why?
hard to say, because I think there's some different design principles of what that means, right? And what I mean by that is like there's building, again, it depends on the type of game too, right? So there's a lot of examples out there. But I think right now, a lot of mobile in particular, it's an inflationary design economy, right? So you're building for inflation, and that's what those games are built for, and you're trying to get as many items out because you're trying to capture that funnel. And I think it's a little bit different structure when you think about what could this mean for players, right? It's a lot about kind of being entrepreneurial, letting them have their say and build something, right? So it really depends on the game. If you're a builder, or you could build, I think a great example would be like a tokenized guild structure, right? Guilds are such a powerful mechanic within games, and I think right now you usually just join a game. A lot of times you just join a game, find the first one you can join. But I think over time what gets really interesting is if you think about a gamer's decision, they have two resources they can put into a game, right? Generally, it's time and money. And imagine if you can start having the people I want to play with, there's a social contract, right, that's actually locked by blockchain. And out of that, basically what can happen is I can decide, okay, here's our strategy. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to use people to, we're going to go in and we're going to do all the farming and resource gathering ourselves. And another group could be like, hey, we're all going to contribute some money and do that because we're going to focus on this, right? So it starts creating a new social contract, which I think is exciting. So I think you can start looking even back to, you could obviously go to, WoW's always a great example because they did have a lot of cells and gold farming and all that happened outside of the game, kind of breaking the economy a little bit because it wasn't built in. But I think you could think, resource gatherings, building. I think building's amazing. UGC platforms are amazing. But even racing, sports games, tradables, all that type of stuff, I think can really be enhanced if you do it the way that makes sense for that particular game, right? Again, there's not a one-size-fits-all type model for this. It's really a palette, a new brush, in your palette that you can start painting with, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Are there any others?
So this is not a particular game, but I would say that one sort of product idea that we've seen sort of multiple startups attempt that I'm actually very excited about is just the concept of what if you took Roblox and actually built that in the blockchain? And so the idea is that, hey, like right now, like if you're a Roblox developer, like you build a game and you launch it in Roblox and it's sort of captive within Roblox, and then you're sort of beholden to the platform to pay you a certain revenue share of the game, right? And so the idea is that if you could build a decentralized version of Roblox, essentially, where you have a platform that also has tools and services that enable you to build games quickly and effectively, you could essentially still ship those games, but then if you do them with NFTs inside of them, as a result of the way NFTs work, you can attach code to the tokens, which basically ensures that the creator gets paid a royalty, forever, for any transactions that involve that particular, game or token or item. And so I think it's a way of sort of handing power back to the creators, like the individual game devs, as opposed to the platforms, and then making sure that, if you create Dota or you create Among Us, for example, the next big thing, that you will get paid for that, essentially, even if you're an indie developer, a hobbyist on Roblox or one of these other larger platforms. I think that's very exciting, and I think it speaks a lot to sort of this longer-term view of decentralization, which is very, very key for Web3 and NFTs.
Yeah, can we touch on that a little bit more? Because when I talk to people about NFTs, they're like, it can do this, and it can do that, and this is another thing that it can do. And like, when we fast forward 10 years from now, for those of you that are in the space and we look back, like, what are the core things that you think NFTs will enable for businesses as well as for players? Like, what are going to be the hallmarks of like, hey, this is what an NFT?
I think where we're at now is probably not where we need to be, right? And I think we're the first to admit that, is we're not quite there yet. Concepts around ownership, right? You don't fully own that, right? But I also think there's misnomers around that. But I think the concept of ownership will be important, right? And we get this a lot too, saying, well, you don't actually own Spider-Man in the game. If I get Spider-Man NFT, I don't own Spider-Man. I don't own the copyright to Spider-Man. Well, if you buy a figurine of Spider-Man, you own that figurine. You don't own the copyright to Spider-Man either, right? So, but you can, as a consumer, you have freedom around that, right? I can put Spider-Man right next to a DC character, right? That's my prerogative as a consumer. I can dress them up. I can sell them on Craigslist. I can do what I want as an owner of that item. And I think that's where we're slowly heading on the NFT side. We're not there yet. It's right now, one of the big criticisms as well, it's a link to ownership. Yeah, you're right. It is kind of a link to ownership. And I think as an industry, we have to do more, right, around the assets and can the assets be used. But I think where it starts getting really powerful is partly in the new generation of consumers too. And we're seeing a big shift in demographics right now of people that want to, it's not hardcore gamers. They're not coming in and downloading a 100 gig game. They want to come in and play in these worlds and then kind of move on and then come back and move on and transact, kind of interactively. But I think where that starts happening is it's that demographic. It's the demographic of player now that they've grown up digital, Having a digital, honestly, my daughters are a great example. Having their Spotify playlist shared with their friends is just as important as it was for us to show off our CD collection, right? It's a physical versus digital, but it's just as powerful of a mechanic to their behaviors as physical objects were to us. And I think we'll see more of that. And I think we're going to see these items that they play along their lifetime. Having that digital and having that collection is going to be important, right? And there are a lot of opportunities for interoperability and all that type of stuff that people talk about. Some of it's a little bit of a pipe dream. Some of it's going to be very tangible. But I think it's just a shift in how people view ownership, right? And especially of digital objects versus maybe a physical object.
So talking about ownership, so think of NFTs kind of like owning an NFT, kind of like owning a house or like your property. So you fully own that kind of like title, right? And that land is really, really unique, right? That like house is unique from other houses. And as an NFT, you're actually holding a really unique kind of like asset, and you fully own that asset. And there's so much opportunities that could actually be built outside of gaming. So for example, if I hold an NFT, I can actually, because I own it, I can actually use it as a collateral to actually extend and get a mortgage, right? I could actually use my NFT as well, because it's on the blockchain, to kind of represent who I am. It's a good way of expressing yourself and your character. So it's some form of identity and reputation. So if your wallet, your crypto or gaming wallet, actually holds these numbers of NFT assets, I could actually prove that this is really my identity. Especially today, there's just a lot of impersonifications in Telegram groups, for example, or chat groups. But if I actually have an NFT, I can actually prove that this is really me, right? This is the activities that I've actually done in the past. With NFTs, you kind of know, and with your wallet as well, you kind of know how many hours, for example, you've been spending playing a game, or what games you're really interested in. And then there's just a lot of opportunities that can be built on top of that.
Go ahead, John.
So I think the ownership topic, has been very, that was a great explanation. Maybe you can talk a bit about sort of the longer term vision for what I think what some developers are trying to build for 5 to 10 years from now, if everything holds true and everyone has NFTs and everyone is sort of fully embraced Web3, what would a game look like? And so just to illustrate for an example, so we were just talking about Apex Legends in a talk right before us. I think Apex Legends as a true sort of Web3 NFT game would actually not be run by Electronic Arts or Respawn. It would be run most likely by a DAO, which is a decentralized sort of community. It's just it's a group of players that basically have decided that I love Apex Legends, and I'm going to spend money to basically be in the Apex Legends governance body. And then what that means is that the players themselves, by virtue of how much money they've spent in the game, will vote to determine what happens within the game and say, hey, this character is too overpowered, I'm going to note that. It's not going to be a developer, it's not going to be a game designer that's actually making those changes. It's actually going to happen by the community. And then, future sort of a roadmap, sort of new features in the game, that will also be done by sort of the community. And so the idea is that the community governs, the community develops, the community designs. And the idea is that the players themselves know what's best for the game, as opposed to some creative director or centralized authority that's trying to interpret the will of the community and might actually make a mistake and have to roll that back, right? And so I think this is sort of the longer term evolution of hey, if all games move to sort of a fully decentralized model, this is how development design would look. And it's very sort of, it's oriented towards giving power to sort of the players themselves, as opposed to sort of centralized publishers or gatekeepers.
Can I take a little slight counter to John's point on this? So I hear you completely, and I think for a lot of games that's going to work. But I think also for everybody that's had a game that if fans come up and they're like, I got an idea for your game, and we had this a lot in Call of Duty. A kid would come up and he'd be like, I got an idea for the game. I want a bomb that's so big it kills everyone in the game in one shot, and I can use it over and over and over. And I'm like, Okay, that's probably not the best idea for the game, right? So I think there is a balance, right? And I think there's a balance, and these games and the games that we build is this amazing crew hire. Like, there's a lot of art that goes into this game. This is not an exact science, right? There's a lot of art, there's a lot of thinking through these problems, and I think that some structures, the idea of turning that over to the community and having it completely community designed is scary, and I don't know if that's going to be the case for most games, but I do think there's aspects of that, right? And that's why I kind of go back to there's subsections of the game, or I have part of this game, or I'm part of the Bard group, and I can start having some influence on that. I think influence is important. I don't think this is necessarily a shift to have everything driven by the community, because I think it's a little bit of a scary proposition. But I do think that there's going to be so many. It's the power of letting stakeholders in on it, right? It's really shifting our virtual worlds to where we're dictating what happens, to letting all of these amazing stakeholders, whether it's esports teams or influencers or brands or musicians or artists or players themselves, letting them in on it, letting them feel part of it, let them feel ownership. And that's what drove me into the space in the first place, is that we saw a lot of these issues. We saw the issues with gray markets and all this stuff, because honestly, anytime you put an item in the game that's no longer available to that consumer base, you have this problem, right? Fortnite doesn't let you resell items, but people still will sell their accounts on eBay to get that marshmallow skin that came out 3 years ago because somebody new wants that skin, right? So we create these problems with scarcity, and this starts solving some of these problems, right? It starts letting people in on it, letting people monetize and value their IP within our worlds. And I think that's really, really exciting. So I think a lot of these DAOs will exist within maybe a segment of the game, or within a gilded game. Maybe there will be a lot of games, John, I think that the entire thing's written by DAOs. But I think it really is going to be back to the game developers to make those decisions, right? And what's best for their community. But I think if you avoid it and you just kind of pretend it's not going to ever be there, I think you're going to miss out on where we're seeing some demographic shift to, and where players are now getting more and more and more involved, right?
Yeah, like at Bonfire, for example, like I'm the not make the game guy. And if the development teams actually took my advice, I think we'd be like in a really bad place. So there's something around that gives me a little bit of fear around kind of the artistry of like what we're making. Yep. But I do like the relationship between the players and the development. Like I do see a future there. One question I have around the technology around kind of blockchain is, I think all of you have kind of touched on the ownership piece. And for me, like rewinding back like 15 years ago, ownership was really more of a policy decision. Right, like the concept of ownership is like so old. Players wanting to own things, that wasn't really a technical challenge for me. So my question to the experts is, what does the blockchain actually enable that couldn't have been done before, that it's not a policy thing, but actually enables new things that could happen as a result?
Well, I think one to me is the psychology around it too. And that was the other piece we kind of got into this, is we had, I was in the free-to-play space, and so you spend $30 or $40 in a game, a lot of times to support the game or to test it out, or you're having fun with it. But I was never a whale. I was just never a whale. I didn't have that in my psyche to where like I'm going to drop thousands of dollars into a game. And a lot of games, especially mobile and free-to-play, depend on those whales, right? And so next thing I know, I was kind of going down this blockchain path and started getting into this thing called CryptoKitties. And suddenly I dropped $600 on images of 2D cats, and I'm just like, what just happened there, right? Like, that's not me. And I think what really caused that to me, and I sat back and thought about it, it is the concept of it's a tangible asset, right? It's not you're trying to get rich quick. You're not spending $600 to guarantee you're going to make $2,000. But as a consumer, you have the freedom to do what you want with it. I can merge those together. I can destroy them. I could buy $600 and destroy them, and they're gone forever, right? I have that decision as a player, as a consumer of the product. And I think that's a powerful mechanism, right? When you let players have something that is considered tangible, and they have the ability to do what they want with it, whether it's policy or they actually own the copyright, there's certain projects that are doing that, that's when it gets exciting, right? And you start seeing changes in players' behavior, and we're seeing that. You mentioned the Kickstarter. People, when they have tangible assets, they feel they're part of it from the beginning, they change their behaviors. They will support the game. They will promote the game. These Discord channels, we have a game right now, we have like 20% of our players are in the Discord channel. We've never seen that before. We have hundreds of thousands of people that are joining the Discord because they feel they're in on it. They feel they're part of this ecosystem. And I don't think I've ever had that in another game before. You always have people come in and out. You have the whales are important, but what if you can let them create their own whales, right? We're not chasing the whales, we're creating the whales now. You let players come up and be their own, be what they want to be in these economies. And to me, those are the parts that I get super excited about of where this is going.
That's really a really interesting point. So one thing that we actually did at like YGG is we kind of like airdropped a lot of these NFTs. So we actually minted swords, shields. We minted like a founder's coin for the first like 300 people that would actually come on our platform, and for free. Like we just literally like dropped them without expecting anything back. But the concept of blockchain and NFTs as well is you can actually kind of with smart contracts, you're able to actually kind of like code like royalties into like the asset. And so like every time that these like coins and shields and swords, they exchange hands from one person to another without being involved, you can actually get like your royalties. And so it becomes like a more like a thriving like marketplace where people can just like interact with you like directly, right? Without thinking that this other like centralized institution is actually involved, but actually because of smart contracts on the blockchain, which is allowed on the blockchain, you're able to actually get that royalties.
Yeah, and I was just going to clarify that I think the thing technically that makes this all possible, right, is that with an NFT, it's a media asset that's stored in a distributed database, but you can also attach code to it. So think about sort of any sort of token as basically a programmable asset. It can be a computer program that runs. And so I think that's the key thing that enables royalty programs. It enables sort of the NFT to change over time based upon the actions that people do, right? Like we talked about leveling up within YGG, based upon like a certain number of actions that the DAO is trying to incentivize. These are all things that are not possible, just from a pure policy perspective, right? Because it's actually the actual virtual goods that people are buying are actually pieces of code that evolve over time, essentially. So.
Okay, let's move a little bit to kind of the development of these games. So NFTs are hopefully going to be built on the backs of like really high quality games, which to me feels like you need high talent to be able to make these games. If I were at our studio and said, hey, Project 2 is an NFT game and you 15 people are going to work on it, I feel like a lot of people would just leave on the spot. And so I'd love to kind of ask, like, why is that? Like, why are developers having this disdain over NFTs and games?
I would guess that some part of it is the relative sort of immaturity of the technology within games, right? It's a new tech. It's new, and change is always hard at the beginning, especially if things are going well, right? And so I think if you're an established developer, you have an IP out there that's doing well, that's making lots of money, and you have an engaged player base. It's honestly a lot of risk right now to then go and say, hey, we're going to experiment with putting NFTs into your game, right? And so, I think a lot of the innovation that we've seen has specifically come from sort of new IP, new projects, new teams starting from scratch, right? Because then you have nothing to lose, and if anything, the sort of ground swelling of sort of fundraising directly from your players, right? Like getting them on board early as evangelists. I think that works to your advantage. And so I think some part of it is just the technology is new as it matures, as like more games are produced that are good and are actually fun to play. I think sentiment will also shift. I think Beryl made a great point earlier that like the majority of sort of people's interactions with like NFTs and games comes from one game, which is Axie Infinity. And then a lot of it is just reading on Reddit and Twitter, which we all know are very polarizing forums for this sort of discussion. And so we just need to have more games, more high quality games. We need to keep building, essentially. And then that is ultimately how...
kind of like a chicken and the egg problem, though, I guess, is that like, why is there negative sentiment? Because I talk to other people and it's like, hey, it's incredibly hard to recruit talented developers for NFT games. And I'd love to understand like what that is. To me, it doesn't really feel like, hey, it's just a new thing. It's actually like pushing, opposing it. So like, where does that actually come from?
Happy to take that one. So there's definitely a really strong stigma with using like cryptocurrency, right? And this was during the ICO of like 2017. When people were just like, because it's a gold rush, right? In every like new technological innovation, whether it's the internet, whether it's the ICOs, whether it's railroads or stocks, right? It really attracts a lot of infusion of new capital in the space, and that's really, really attractive, right? And so it attracts, for example, people who really want to build stuff, but it also attracts people who want to make like a quick buck as well, right? And it really dilutes the quality of, it really dilutes the quality in participants of those that really, really want to build stuff. And because of that, right, you also attract, because of capital infusion, it also attracts scammers, for example. There would be people impersonating you, asking for money, for example, or they would actually launch quite like a similar website, but it's going to start like asking for a seed phrase, and then you get to lose like your assets. So yes, it's true. There is really a stigma around it, and I guess like right now it's more of really educating. Like how do we actually protect these assets, right? Do we need to use like 2FA or multi-sig to protect that? There are ways to protect, for example, your assets. Yeah, I think it's more about like really educating what the benefits of blockchain is at this point.
And I think we just don't know what good looks like yet still, to be super honest. Like, I think we haven't seen that blockbuster game that changes the perspective of developers. And that's, we've seen that again in our industry a long time. I think about Hearthstone. I mean, how many TCG games came out from great developers after Hearthstone, right? Like, Hearthstone didn't create TCG. It'd been around for a while, you know? They just did it and they reinvigorated that space. And I think we're waiting for that to happen still. And I think it's on its way. I think there actually are great studios right now. I can name, there's lots of studios that are actively working on projects, and then across all types of genres, from racing to sports to RPG to auto battler to simulation to lifestyle games. We're seeing tons of studios that are actually working on it. None of them are quite out yet. And as you kind of mentioned, to do that right, to build the right game that really fits natively, it takes some time. And I think you'll start seeing more of those this year. And I think you'll start seeing, oh my God, that actually worked and players had a great time with it. Now we're on board, right? And we saw the same thing. Like I said, EA's and Activision's and even Ubisoft's, Ubisoft was a little bit earlier in mobile, but like EA's and Activision's took a little bit of time to get into mobile, right? And that's okay. That created the Supercells, that created the Rovios, that created all these amazing new companies that are so powerful in our industry now. And it's okay for not everybody to come right away. But I think what you'll see is that the people that are thinking about it will start seeing some really interesting benefits. And I think, there are some amazing stuff we've already seen, right? Reduced cost of acquisition, increased ARPUs, different changes in retention, different types of demographics. One of the stats I'll throw out there is we see 17% of revenue off of our game Blanco's Block Party. They don't even play the game. They just love collecting and trading, and it's not like they're trying to get rich off these things. They just like interacting with each other, and they like interacting in the IP. Imagine if you have a free-to-play game. The margins are so tight right now, right? It could be 1% difference in your cost of acquisition against LTV. They could be the success or not, right? Imagine if you suddenly have 16% of additional revenue that just want to play in these worlds you're creating. That's powerful for our industry, right? You've moved beyond just game mechanics and platforms. You're now bringing people into your IP. And I think things like that, that's why it'll be transformative long term, is it just opens it up, right? It opens up who's working with you. It opens up how people are interacting with you, and it changes how your player base engages long term.
Right. What are some of the things that when you talk to people in the industry that they call out as challenges for you to actually make it, right? So when I like 15 years ago when I was talking about our games, people would say, "Oh, that's a pretty big file. No one's ever going to download that," right? And our players were actually like downloading it overnight. But fast forward to today, like we don't have physical media anymore. So what are things like that people are posing as reasons for these things never to be adopted?
Sorry, I didn't hear completely. You're saying what are the reasons why people say when
the naysayers are saying this will never happen, right?
I think a lot of it is around scams, right? They're like, this is a scam, this is a Ponzi scheme, and honestly, there's a lot of them out there. Like, there's a lot of examples of that. I think to me, one of the most frustrating things in this space right now is people that put out one of these these PFP projects, they call them, like the Bored Apes type stuff. But the Bored Apes did something interesting. There's 1,001 copiers of that, right? And again, we get a lot of these groups that come out and they say, we've had $200 million of trade volume. We want a game. And we're like, okay, cool. You want to create utility around this community? That's very admirable. And then you start talking to them and like, well, what's the game? And they're like, okay, here's the game. It's going to be kind of Overwatch meets a little bit of WoW. We'll throw in a little Apex Legends, because I just like the shooting in that game. And we want to get that done in about 6 months. Can you guys do that? And I'm like, are you kidding me? So there's a big disconnect right now. And I think that causes noise, right? And I think we'll continue to see some of that noise, and we'll get through that as an industry. But I do think, like I said, I think there's just people jumping into the space. There's a lot of hype right now, and with a lot of hype comes a lot of craziness. And I think I think that's one of the things we've seen, and we see it with our own employees. They're just like, oh man, what are these projects? Like, why would we do something with these guys? And really for us, it's really about thinking through how do we bring something real to a player base in an economy in a world that makes sense, right? Not just let's tack on some game functionality to a bunch of JPEGs and hope it works, right? So I think that to me is where the naysayers kind of jump in.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to mention that Beryl mentioned that the environmental concerns earlier. I think that will quickly go away as technology improves, and then we batch sort of transactions now on sort of layer 2 blockchains, and so I think that will go the way of sort of concern over sort of like file download sizes, right? It'll be something that was a concern in sort of the early days of the technology, but then goes away.
Got it. Makes sense. Let's move a little bit to kind of the people that are playing the games or starting kind of this revolution. So play to earn is a completely new concept. Beryl, I think your company's kind of been pioneering that. Can you tell us a little bit about that and who these people are? The play to earn community.
Oh, so you're asking about what the community of play to earn is
Yes.
right now? Yeah. So
Because usually people are playing for fun. So play to earn is like a completely new thing that I think a lot of people that are the incumbents don't truly understand.
So I mentioned like earlier that play to earn is very, very new. It's a really new concept, but it started thriving, and it just so happened during the pandemic, right, where people actually just ended up like downloading this game, playing games, and they actually earn in-game rewards, which could actually be converted into fiat currency, for example, and they get to actually pay for food, but milk for the kids. Right, they have like extra savings, and because of that, it kind of like spread like wildfire. It's very much like word of mouth within the community, and there was actually like one kind of like province in the Philippines where every single one of them in the neighborhood was just like downloading the game and just like playing it, and because of that, there's also for play to earn games, it's very much like building that community around. So there's an emergence of new roles, like a new economy, where you actually have brokers, for example, who are kind of selling real estate, and then you actually have, influencers emerging, the players, and then you actually have managers, and then you actually have, these managers that are doing all these like tutorials to kind of like teach new players, and then once this new player actually ends up like earning, they're able to become a manager on their own, and then after managing 5, 10 people, 20 other players, they actually end up like investing as well, becoming investors in the NFT space. They end up like buying other NFTs, right, and they end up like learning how to use these other DeFi platforms, for example. So, like use it as collateral to get a loan, or being able to like swap them. And to think about it, these are guys like in the Philippines that are unbanked. Like they never really had like a bank account before, and they actually learn like new skills just by playing games, right? They actually start like earning, and then it's for them the experience is really like gamified. So they learned, finance in the gamified kind of like environment, and I guess that is the culture of what like play to earn kind of like imposed within the community.
Are those players also having fun?
I mean, I think there's 2 types of play to earn right now, and I think what Beryl's doing is amazing in kind of these early play to earn economies, like these literally these countries around the world. It's changing their lives, which I think is pretty cool. I think that a lot of them view it still as kind of like a job though right now.
Okay.
It's an earn first, right? And I think where we'll see 2 types of play to earn over time. One is earn first, which is it's great, and I think it's amazing to be able to participate in these economies to make money. But I think there's another one that's coming called play first, right? Which is how do we incorporate these ideas to where it's still gameplay and you can still earn things and you can sell them, but it's not necessarily, the focus is not on earning, the focus is on being part of it, right? Being part of that community. It's the creator economy, right? We talk about the creator economy, we talk about metaverse, all this type of stuff. It's letting people be part of that. And I think what you guys are doing is awesome, and I think there's new mechanics in terms of like lending assets, and how do you have the whales and the non-whales play in harmony, right? that's actually a great concept. That's a really cool concept that could change gaming in terms of like, great, you have that kind of the haves and the have-nots right now. People that are just grinding games and people that are spending a ton of money. How do you create a new balance between the two? How do you let them feed off each other? How do you let people that want to spend their time in the games playing actually make some money off of the people that are spending, right? Those are the concepts I think that YGG is doing that's really, really cool. It's transformative to where we could do that. But I think we watch it right now, and it's like, well, it's not really fun. You know, it's just a game I come in and play an RPG game, and I just kind of hit some buttons and I make some money. And I think that's right for a lot of the games now, but I think you take the concepts they're doing and you apply it to all these other games, they do become fun, and you can make money on it too in the background. And I think we're quickly heading that direction, very quickly.
Yeah. I just wanted to double click on that point that you made, John. I think it's fantastic that the holy grail here is like you have two distinct player populations now, right? Like people that are earning and then people that are playing for fun. And if you can combine them in one game and then actually have game loops where they directly support one another, I think that's actually really powerful, right? And so I think the example that you gave of, you know, one that I think of all the time is, let's take GTA Online, right? And there's a bunch of role-play servers where people basically go on and they role-play, hey, like I'm going to be a bank teller, and then another person's role-playing, you know, being the bank robber, and another person outside is role-playing being like, you know, the police officer that comes and tries to, like, you know, stop the bank robbery from happening, right? Like you can imagine a world where, you know, maybe the player is a free-to-play player who's playing for fun, and then like the teller and then the police officer are actually, you know, people that are being paid to actually perform that job inside of like the GTA Online server, right? And that's something that's like very synergistic, because the people that are earning wages in the game as a virtual bank teller, it's actually probably a better job for them than their real world alternatives, right? Especially if you're in, you know, one of these countries that's been hit hard by the pandemic. And then as a player, you know, you have this like rich, vibrant world around you that you can interact with. So I think those are the types of games that are, you know, that are being designed right now that, you know, that we have some really great game teams working on, right? Like how do you combine free-to-play players that are playing for fun with a segment of the player base that is playing for earning?
Yeah, I'm trying to challenge myself to think like maybe they're not mutually exclusive, right? It's like maybe you could be playing to earn, but also playing to fun. Maybe you love your job.
Absolutely.
There's games like Lineage out there that people still play today, and I'm told one of the reasons why is that they play in these games and they create value, and they have value in these games. So I'm like, okay, maybe I need to challenge myself. It's not this or that. Maybe there are games that you can actually have both someday in the future.
I mean, think about the trading card industry, right? Like, people collect them, they have value, people sell them. I don't think that they do it just to make a living, right? There are certain people that do, and you know, that's great. But you can also look at streaming, right? The streaming influencers and all that. Like, yeah, there's some of them that make millions of dollars. They do incredibly well. They've built amazing careers and franchises off of their streaming. But there's so many streamers too that just want to stream to 4 or 5 people because they like doing it, you know? They like to get on Twitch and they play and watch their friends chat with them while they do it. And so I think, again, it's not one or the other. It's definitely not one or the other. It's giving these new opportunities to exist in our framework, right? Allowing this stuff to happen legally, doing it without fraud, you know, to try and protect the consumers, to let them play and let them create where they want to create. So yeah, I don't think they're mutually exclusive at all.
Agreed.
Cool. So what kind of games and player behaviors will exist in the future as a result of NFTs that maybe don't exist today?
Again, I think it depends on the game. Yeah, GTA, yeah, you could easily see GTA. You could be anything you want to be in the game. That's an easy one to see. Like, okay, you can make it. There's a lot you can do there. But I think you can do it with a lot of different games, right? So again, racing titles, you can suddenly have stakes in the game, right? Legally, you know, we're not promoting gambling on these things, but you can suddenly put my assets up against your assets. There's ways you can change tokens or guild structures and clan structures and things like that in games. So I think honestly, I think there's a lot of genres this would apply to. Will it apply to every single game? Is it a blanket statement that every game will have NFTs? No, of course not. Just like not every game's on mobile, and not every game would make sense in VR. It's a segment of the industry, but I think it's going to be a growing segment. I think it can affect most games, you know, out there in terms of the founding packs and the different things like that.
Yeah, it feels like most of the most popular NFT games right now are involving some sort of collectible asset, right? And so, you know, CCGs are a popular one, right? Like Axie Infinity is basically a card battler with a sort of creature collector sort of metagame on top of that. And Splinterlands, which is a very popular one, that's also a card battler. And Gods Unchained is also a popular card battling NFT game. But I think the interesting thing is many games have a collection mechanic as part of like the core loop. And so I think any any such game, I think, would be an obvious sort of next step to integrate NFTs. And then the broader question is like, can you make a first-person shooter, for example, or something that does not have a collection mechanic as part of its core loop? Can you make that, NFT-based in a way that feels good and is complementary? And then the last is, I would say, MMOs. So games like EVE Online and World of Warcraft, right? Like they've long had sort of shadow economies where people are trading, virtual goods and accounts and, figuring out a way to legitimize those professions, right? And that activity in game, and then actually having that work for the benefit of the community, as opposed to having it be this sort of shadow activity that happens, off the platform. I think that's also a ripe genre for innovation in NFTs.
I wanted to add something. So I guess one thing that would change in behavior is maybe a stronger sense of being part of a community, because for example, if you hold governance tokens of a particular game or being part of a guild, you need to contribute, right? You need to vote, you need to pass proposals. And when the community actually votes, they make decisions based out of those proposals, right? So your involvement becomes really, really important. That's one. Number two is we actually kind of tokenized League of Kingdoms, like a parcel of land, for example. And if a parcel of land becomes really expensive, what happens is with a fraction, a number of people could actually own that fraction. And when that community actually ends up building on top of that land, then everyone actually gets that value. So the change in behavior here is people have this concept of, I am responsible. I need to be responsible for my community. I am kind of like an investor. So you kind of impose an investor mindset onto these community members.
My favorite mechanic we've done so far in a play, we actually call it play and earn game right now, because we think the play first is really interesting. It is really the coolest thing we did was we didn't charge anything for. So what happened was we originally had a character we sold, and it was a $10 character, so nothing crazy or but it was NFT backed and people owned it. And after about 30 days, we stopped selling that character, and we probably sold about 12,000 of these characters. And after that, as with natural time-based scarcity, right, it's no longer available, you'll see a slight appreciation. And we're not seeing it, we didn't see it go from $10 to $2,000. We saw it go from $10 to $15 in the market. So people were buying each other, 50% return. Not bad, right? So that was kind of happening. And then we announced a feature called Gem Rush. And Gem Rush for us was basically a Pokemon evolution mechanic, right? So there's 12,000 of them out there. And now what we're going to do is if you go in the game, there's going to be 2 evolutions of that character. Completely free. We didn't charge anything for it. And we limited them, said, hey, one's going to be one of 2,000 and one's going to be one of 200 to create something really, and we just want to see what happened. And so you basically had to play it in the game, and you leveled it up, and you maxed out the level. And we did an experiment saying, well, what if you have to have 2 of them, right? So you have to have 2 of them and max them up. And then once you max them, you can merge them into a new character. And you could trade 2 of them in for one of 2,000. And what we did is we made you burn the old ones. So now at the end of the day, there was only about 6,000 or 7,000 left of the originals. And people loved it, because what happened is now there's a lot less than what there was. So the perceived value by the open ecosystem went up, and those started selling for $50, $60. But then the new ones started selling for $400, and then the really, really rare ones would sell for $1,500. And this is not crypto. This is actually just cash. People would do credit cards and buy them back and forth because they wanted one of those items and they weren't able to play the game to get one. So they went and wanted to buy it from somebody else. So for us, we didn't. Now we did benefit because we get a percentage of all the secondaries, which is a great benefit of these type of economies. As game developers are cut in on it, the original artist was cut in on it. So there's kind of revenue generation off of a free event, but we never actually charged anything for that. But the community went crazy for it. It was very cool to see, and it was a race to how fast can I get there? And oh my God, I didn't know this was going to be a new event. And that type of stuff was so fun to see the community react to that. And I think part of that reaction was there's value off of that, right?
So we're almost on time. I just wanted to ask one more question and just kind of turn it to the games, because I know when free-to-play games first came out, and we called them free-to-play games, but that's not really a genre, right? It's like a business model. We're calling them NFT games right now, but when we look 18 months into the future, or maybe even farther beyond that, what genres can players actually expect coming out of games that are using NFTs? Like you look at League of Legends, for example, that's a MOBA. I don't think we would call that a free-to-play game. That's how players engage it. So what are the genres that players can actually be excited for coming out based on what you all are seeing with developers out there?
Yeah, I think the exciting thing is that we think there will be new genres that have not been created today, right? And I think that's the promise of any sort of new technology or platform, is that it should enable new game mechanics, new core game loops, new ways of interacting between players socially, right, that don't exist today. And so a game like, Pokemon Go, like back in the PC days, like what would you have called that genre, right? It's like, it's a, creature collector game, but then it's also on mobile, and then there's augmented reality and so on. And so I think in similar fashion, there will, sort of our sort of longer term thesis in the space is that Web3 is a technology. NFTs are a technology, just like any other technology, and it can be used well or poorly. And we're backing teams that are like looking for ways to innovate, using NFTs and to create new genres and gameplay that we haven't seen before. And of course, like there are existing genres, like we mentioned a few of them already, like MMOs, creature collectors, card battlers. These games I think make natural extensions to kind of bridge the gap between now and sort of the the new genres of tomorrow. But
Got it.
Yeah.
We're almost on time. Anything real quick?
Yeah, so I'm starting to see like other maybe like move to play, move to earn. You actually see learn to earn as well. I guess like these might actually be like new genres. I'm also starting to see more games that are launching in 2022 in like MMORPG games, MMOs applied with NFTs applied onto them.
Yeah, I think we'll see a lot of genres. So sports, open world, MMO, RPG, racing, simulation, lifestyle games. I think you'll see a lot of different games come out. So.
Cool. So I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank everybody in the audience for being with us today. Thank the Academy for giving us this time. I'm just going to say, like, I've had some regrets over the years after evangelizing free-to-play. A lot of bad things came out of it, and kind of look back in those moments, and I was like pretty down. But then I look at games like companies like Riot and Supercell, and they've done things that I think are pretty amazing for players. So that's my hope, is that we fast forward 10 years into the future, and there's really cool applications for this. But I'm sure we're going to make some mistakes on the way there, and hopefully we can try our best to avoid them. Thank you.
Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Thank you.